Welcome into a brand new episode of a whole new ball game with Vinnie Pasquantino and
Alex Feuz.
Alex Feuz. Let's go. We've got Jack Curry on the pod today, and we're pumped for it. We've got 5 episodes this week. 5 episodes, mostly because we just want to get these interviews out there to the people. It's for you guys. It's not for us. It's for the people. We're going to try to get onto a consistent schedule here at some point when everything cools down after the holidays and everything. And, once we get into a more regular where I'm living, where Alex is living and everything, once we settle down, we'll get more consistent. But hang in there, everybody. It's a busy week for us, but we're excited because these 5 interviews, we're releasing them for a reason because they're all big time. And that's what we like to provide here at a whole new ball game.
Well, that's right, Vinny. And while, yes, it might seem like a lot of content for you to enjoy, but the great thing about podcasts is you can listen to it at any time. And
we won't get Alex. Anytime you want.
Anytime. And we won't get offended.
You're in the shower, you just want to listen to my voice or your voice. There you go. You can just pop it on a road trip, pop it on, making breakfast, pop it on. You're eating breakfast, eating lunch, drinking a cup of coffee, put it on YouTube. That's what I do when I'm eating. I tend to watch YouTube videos. So why not just look at both of our faces and listen to us talk to a guest? Why not?
Well, see, the Vinny is with me when I'm eating. The last thing I want to see is you. Me, I could easily watch me while I eat. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
But I will lose my appetite very quickly if I had to watch you while I eat. So I won't.
Well, that's perfect because then you could just go over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or SoundCloud or wherever you want, and you can listen to my voice and you don't have to see me. So that's
even
perfect.
Your voice.
Well, I guess I just want people to listen to the show way more than you do at this point. So I guess that's where we're at in this relationship.
Well, I love the podcast, but I just can't listen or see you when I eat. That's just not an option.
Well, whatever. I can't control you. But, yep, we've got Jack Curry on today, which is a very exciting interview. He's the pregame and post-game analysis guy for the Yes Network. I guess that's the most simple way to put it. He's also an author. So
a New York Times bestseller author, Vinny. Come on now. Don't sell the guy short.
New York Times bestseller, baby. And we had him on the podcast 2 times over. 2 times over. I mean, that's just what we do here. We're providing great content for the people, like it or not, because we're coming. So the podcast will be out there, and we're very excited for everybody to listen to it.
This was honestly, Vinny, one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. And I think if you are listening to this whole interview, you got to write down and keep track of this. How many times Jack Curry said, I had a great question. I honestly think, Vinny, I didn't ask one question where he didn't say I didn't have a good one. So
okay, well, I would like anybody listening to this, I would like you to fact check that because Alex has been fact checked wrong today by himself, actually, because of an argument we got into and he found out that I was right. So you heard him. He said not one question did Jack Curry not tell him it was a good question. So somebody please fact check for me. Let me know. Let us know on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you need to go to find me. You just let me know. Anybody that's listening, please just keep track. That's all we need to know and see if Alex, every single question was a good one.
I think it was. But anyways, without further ado, he's a pregame and postgame show host for the Yes Network. He's a 2-time New York Times bestseller author, and he also spent over 20 years writing and covering Major League Baseball, the New York Yankees, for the New York Times. Here is our interview with Jack Curry.
We had this interview, Jack, yesterday, and Vinny told me straight up in the interview that I asked a not very good question. And I guess I'll ask you the question, and you can be the judge. Why not? So I asked Bryce Wyndham, who's a top prospect in the Cubs organization, a catcher, and I go, Bryce, what's one TV show you love that everyone hates? So I'll give that one to you.
I'll say this. I don't mind the going off the beaten path a little. You didn't just ask him who's the best coach he's ever had, what's the toughest pitch he has to face. I don't think it's a bad question, but you are setting yourself up for a potentially terrible answer. because you're now asking somebody, what do you love that everybody hates? He might not know that everybody hates Breaking Bad.
That's exactly what I said. Exactly what I said, and that's why it's a terrible question, because no one comes off good after that question.
My pet peeve, though, is yes, no questions. And I see it so often that it drives me crazy. And I think when you ask someone a yes, no question, you almost deserve a one-word answer. And I see that happen so often. So as you're going forward, Alex, you especially, man, use the word how a lot. How did you think you pitched today, as opposed to did you have a great curveball today? The pitcher can say no, and then the interview can fall flat. But I won't say it was a terrible question, Alex. I give you an A, B+ for execution, and maybe a D for result.
Well, I'll start us off with our first legitimate question. So behind you there, it looks like you have about 5 Emmys. Would you talk to our listeners and anybody watching maybe who could see these? What are those? What are they from? Talk to us about them.
Well, Vinnie, I'm sure that you would even notice them. I mean, I really am shocked. When we were setting up at Yes and we knew we were going to do so many Zooms, we actually went through a process with our producer and our director where they said, let me see where you're going to do these from, because we want to make sure that our viewers see something that looks baseball-like, that looks working-like. And one of my directors that I work with said, hey, slide a couple of those Emmys over. And I wasn't necessarily going to do that, but he said, no, of course, do it. So I do have 5 Emmys over there. But I think the part of the story that I like to tell, Vinny, is right in front of them. For instance, I have a couple of old baseballs, and this is not signed by Tom Seaver or Joe Morgan in the 70s. This one says high school home run versus West Catholic, May 15th, 1982, 1-11-8. So you can't see all of them, but I have a baseball in front of each Emmy, and they're all my baseballs, and they're from Little League, they're from high school. And to me, my passion for baseball started at such a young age that if I wasn't so passionate about baseball in Little League or high school, I never even sniffed one of those Emmys. So that's my way of sort of explaining why I'm putting all this hardware in my shot, that you grow up loving something so much like I did, and I know you guys do, and you hope that you eventually get to a point where you can turn it into a profession. And I've been fortunate enough to have a couple of really cool jobs, the job I have now at Yes, and then 20 plus years as a baseball writer for the New York Times. So that all starts with those little baseballs.
I think a part of that, it shows that it's not easy to stay in the business. You have to become innovative. What was kind of one thing that you realize, oh, shoot, I can't really just stay in the box. Like, I do have to try things out as a writer, as a broadcaster, to the point to where you do earn 5 Emmys covering the game that you grew up loving.
So, Vinny, he's stepping up now because that's a really good question.
Well, what I'm doing is I'm making him better. That's the only reason he brought me on, is because I'm the only one that'll call him out on his terrible questions. Most people, thanks, Alex, for bringing me on. Thank you for giving me this platform. No, that's not flying with me. He's going to have to step it up, and I'm really proud of him for asking.
I love it. And he's well on his way, by the way. We're having some fun with him, but he's accomplished more at his age than pretty much anybody that I know who's trying to do what he's doing.
Oh, yeah, believe me. If you bring up his age, he'll keep telling you how young he is.
So back to your question, Alex. The New York Times did me a great favor. I wanted to cover sports. That was my mission. That's been my mission. And when I started at the Times, I didn't start as a reporter. I started at something they called a writing clerk. So that meant I was answering phones. I was doing research for other reporters. I was getting lunch for people. And on my days off, I could try and write. I could suggest a story to an editor and see if he or she was interested in that story. This was going along pretty smoothly. I thought I was on a path to eventually become a reporter. And maybe about 2 years into that, they switched me to news. So for 9 months, I covered news stories. I covered an uprising between the guards and the prisoners at Rikers Island, where I had to try and sneak into Rikers Island as a visitor to one of the prisoners. I covered, unfortunately, a young man and his family were going to the U.S. Open. They were from Utah, and he got stabbed on the New York City subway defending his mother. I had to stand outside the police precinct and watch his parents come out after looking at a lineup to try and identify their son's killer. I covered a fire where 2 young children perished in the fire, and the parents were standing around afterwards so bewildered that they asked me if I could give them a ride to a relative's. So that was a lot of heavy stuff. That was not runs, hits, and errors. But what that told me and what that did for me is it sharpened my reporting skills, and it made me much more aware of what was going on. It helped me not too much after that. I was at Yankee Stadium, and this is probably 91 or 92, and someone said there had been an incident or something at Yankee Stadium. I knew who to call. I know that there's somewhere in New York City that you can call to find out, has a crime been reported? Can you tell me? And other writers were sort of going to the Yankees and asking them. I went straight to the police source. So as much as I love sports and always wanted to do sports, I thank the Times for a little while, because I think it made me a better reporter.
So you talk about not being in sports for a little bit and wanting to be in sports. What really drove you to really want to cover sports and to be a sports reporter, to be a sports writer?
Vinnie, I have an older brother. He's a couple years older than me. And I remember distinctly being 5 years old. I grew up in Jersey City. We lived in a 4-story apartment building, 16 apartments. Our field was a little narrow yard next to the apartment building. And I remember he said, I want you to hit a baseball today. And we played that day for hours and hours and hours. And my love started that day, and it never stopped. Now, you're chasing your dream right now as a player. I was mature enough by the time I was about 17. I played high school baseball. I started, but I wasn't all county or anything like that. I was a decent high school baseball player. I got to Fordham, and I went to one baseball practice, and it took about 4.5 hours. I looked around, about 35 kids trying out for 30 spots. I think I would have made it, but I also knew I would not have started. And the next day I went and signed up for the school radio station and the school newspaper, and I stopped playing baseball, and I said, I'm going to try and make sure that I stay in the baseball world by writing about it and covering it. And I try to tell kids when I talk to them, journalism students or even athletes, listen, man, everybody would like to be in your position. Everybody would like to have that little leg kick and that lefty power swing that you have. And there's a very limited amount of people who are going to have the opportunity to do that. But if you can stay in this world and still figure out a way to cover baseball or work for a baseball team or work for an agent, become an agent, go to law school and become an agent, there's so many other jobs out there. So for me, baseball was always the focus, but I knew the playing side of it kind of died after high school. And I always just loved journalism. I always loved writing. In college, I would rather write a 10-page paper than take a 10-question quiz, because I could just do it like that. So I was fortunate enough to combine the baseball love and the writing love, and then fortunate enough to spin that off into broadcasting as well.
Well, so to kind of build off of that, you talk about writing and everything. How did you get into more broadcasting and using your voice as opposed to just using your words?
At Fordham, there's a great radio station, WFUV. It's a 50,000-watt radio station right in the heart of New York City. And it's a college radio station, but we treated it like we were professionals. We covered Yankee games, Mets games, Knicks games. We did all of that. So Alex, I apologize for this phone ringing. Do you want me to answer that again? Do you want to edit this, or do you not care that the phone was ringing?
I mean, that's fine.
Okay.
We love the raw, unedited footage.
Okay.
That's what we're here for, is for moments like this.
Well, you're a reporter. Well, I guess you are an insider with the Yes Network as a pregame and postgame show host. It would be if this was a normal 2020 year. This would be the winter meetings. So I expect your phone to be ringing the second week of December. It would be unorganic if it wasn't, Jack.
Yeah, this actually sounds like a spam call, by the way. This doesn't sound like it's related to the winter meetings. And it's also the phone that my wife only answers, and she's not home right now. So that's my apology. But Vinnie, WFUV was a great training ground. And I'm going to I don't have anything Fordham around here. I was going to say, I'm going to wave my Fordham banner here right now. If there's someone who is looking at schools and is interested in broadcasting, Fordham is a fantastic place to go for that. If you look right now, the Knicks play-by-play guy, Mike Breen, Fordham. The Yankee play-by-play guy, Michael Kay, Fordham. The football Giants play-by-play guy, Bob Papa, Fordham. Chris Carino and Ryan Rucco do the Nets, and then Ryan also does the Yankees, Fordham. The list just keeps going on and on. So while I was in college, I wrote for the school newspaper and I worked for the radio station. When I got out of Fordham, I sent resumes to newspapers, magazines, radio stations, and TV stations. And I said, I'll go to the place that I get the best job. And it ended up being a newspaper. I worked for the Star Ledger in New Jersey. But I always had the interest in broadcasting. And I sort of maintained that interest because when you become a sports writer for the New York Times, you get asked to do interviews. So I was on radio stations. I was on TV stations. And I think that helped. Never was nervous about it. I have my job and I'm going to go do an interview on a TV station. If I stumble over a couple of words, so what? I go back to doing my newspaper job. So I remember when I started at Yes, officially, people said, were you nervous? And I'm not lying when I say that I wasn't, because I felt as if I had taken enough BP in the TV world, so to speak, that when I stepped in the box there full time, it didn't rankle me at all.
Yeah.
So we talked about you began your career writing and then broadcasting. What's still out there that you want to accomplish in your career?
Wow. Vinnie, he's stepping up. That's another good question. Well, I've written a couple of books and they've both been New York Times bestsellers. So I'm very appreciative and happy about that. I did one with Jeter. We slapped Jeter's face on the cover, so that's going to sell a lot of copies. I did one with David Cohn, which came out in 2019. And Coney is so smart about pitching and all of the idiosyncrasies and everything, that pitcher-batter confrontation, that did really well. Wow. What is still out there that I would like to do? I don't know that I have an answer right now. And maybe that's a good thing, because I worked for the New York Times. I got a chance to cover World Series champions there and write stories that appeared on the front page. I've worked for Yes, and that is a fantastic place to work. So many talented people that we work with. I guess I would say in the 11 years that I've been to Yes, the Yankees haven't won a World Series. So it would be cool to cover a team on the TV side that actually went all the way. I've done that as a print journalist, and I've got a couple of those articles behind me right here. So it'd be kind of neat to be doing a pregame and a postgame with the Yankees being in the World Series.
What year did you start at Yes, did you say?
I started there in 2010.
Oh, so do you think that you're the reason the Yankees haven't won the World Series then? Because by my math,
Yes,
they won in 2009.
Yes, I have not contributed enough OBP. I haven't been able to do anything that's – it's interesting that you say that. It is a pretty long drought for the Yankees, and everybody at Yes – I mean, we cover the Nets and we cover NYC FC soccer. The Yankees are the highest rated show and highest rated team on Yes, for sure. So I'm not going to take the fall for that one, though, Vinny. I'm just not.
Well, I mean, the reason why I asked what's there left to accomplish, right? Because I think it's natural for people, either if you're an athlete and you're a baseball player or a writer or a journalist, broadcaster, you have that competitive edge. It's just, why else would you get up every single day? You already won 5 Emmys. You already wrote, 2 New York Times bestsellers. You already spent 20 years at the New York Times and over 10 years with Yes. So I guess a follow-up to that is, why do you still get up? And is it just because you love it? Or is there something else out there that forces you to get out of bed and still continue to do the job you do?
Even though I have Emmys in my picture here right now, I have never been someone – we all like to win awards. I'm not going to lie. Of course you want to win an award. You want someone to recognize your work. But I don't think that is the mark of who you are. If when your career is over, you're counting the number of awards that you won, I think that's a problem. I would rather recap the impact that some of your work has had. And I think that's the thing that really keeps me going, Alex. I'll tell you a quick story. It's not the most wonderful story. In some ways, it's a nice story, but it doesn't have a happy ending. I met a gentleman by the name of Pat Quinn about 5 or 6 years ago. Met him at Yankee Stadium, and Pat had ALS. And at the time I met him, Pat was standing there. He had a Lou Gehrig shirt on. We could talk. Well, ALS robs you of pretty much everything. But Pat and I remained friends. And a couple of years ago, we did a feature story on Pat. And we won an Emmy for our feature on Pat and what he was doing in terms of ALS and communicating. And he had this unbelievable technology where he would use his eye muscles to be able to take a word or a letter on the computer and communicate with you. Well, they also added a feature that because he had done so many interviews about ALS, when he lost his voice, instead of having that computerized voice coming out of his laptop, they were able to. We did the story on. And after we won the Emmy, a couple of the people at Yes, before I could even ask, because this was going to be my suggestion, they said, we got to get Pat an Emmy. He was the subject of the story. Yes won the Emmy, but we wouldn't have won the Emmy without Pat. Well, unfortunately, Pat passed away a couple of weeks ago. But his Emmy was proudly displayed at the funeral home. And his father told me that in getting his affairs in order, one of the things he said was, make sure that my Emmy from Yes is at the funeral home. Now, what's more important, that story that I just told you or covering a playoff game? I think the Pat Quinn story and having that relationship with him and his dad and having met some of his friends. So when you ask what more I want to do, just continue to have an impact. Cover baseball, but know that you have a platform and know that you can tell stories about people like Pat Quinn and know that you can do things that maybe people don't even know that you're doing to help people along the way. That kind of thing, I think, is why you get up in the morning, or why I get up in the morning, Alex.
So when you talk about having a platform, you said you grew up in New Jersey. You're in the media mecca, essentially. How do you think that being in New York has really affected what you've been able to do?
That's a very good question, Vinnie, because without criticizing or disparaging any other markets, New York is different. And I grew up in Jersey City, and I was a wiffle ball throw away from the Lincoln Tunnel. So we always saw ourselves as the sixth borough. And there's a pace to things in New York and Jersey City. And there's a grittiness and an expectation, and there's a competition level. When I got on the New York Yankee beat, the writers who were on the beat at that time, Michael Kay, Joel Sherman, John Heyman, several other writers that might not be as prominently remembered as them, but were I got my head handed to me for the first several months on the beat. But that was good, because the only way you get better at something sometimes is by failing. And I appreciate how competitive those guys were, because I thought I was a competitive guy, but when I first got there, I didn't have the sources that they had. I didn't have the relationships with the players that they had. But how hard they worked and how good they were forced me to work harder. Again, without mentioning any other cities, I know some other cities where things are just a lot more laid back and they're a lot more relaxed. And you don't have 50 people in the Yankee clubhouse before a game. You have 3 writers or 2 writers and a radio broadcaster and a TV broadcaster. So I think my personality, having grown up in the tri-state area, was more wired to be like that. I've often wondered, and I will throw this city out there because it's just known. I've often wondered if I got a job with the San Diego Union Tribune, would I have been as competitive, as aggressive? I believe I would have been. But what would it have been received like in San Diego? It's expected in New York. Brian Cashman, the GM, will often say, I can't tell you guys this, but I know you're going to find out anyway, because he has respect for the work that everybody does to try and uncover what's going on with the team. There's a passion here, man. There's a passion in the Northeast for sports, and I absolutely love that. I adore that. I would not be able to work as effectively in a place where I thought that things were just kind of laid back. Okay. I love the fact that when the Yankee game ends, Bob Lorenz, myself, John Flaherty, we're the first thing that people hear talking about the game. And I know they're listening. And I know if we say something that they disagree with, they'll put it on Twitter or whatever they'll do. But I appreciate that. And I like that passion.
One of my favorite quotes came from Susan Wallman, who was on my other podcast I did back in May. And she said, one of my favorite things, I always remind myself, someone is always listening.
Yeah.
It could be a player. It could be the player's girlfriend or wife, their mother, their father, their brother or sister, a fan. There is always somebody listening. And you mentioned failure, and I think you said it best, where failure, you learn, you take the lessons learned. What would be one of your biggest failures that you've learned from in your career?
It's a great question. It's an anecdote, but it's something we talked about earlier in this podcast. The second professional baseball game I ever covered was a Met game. The Times sent me aside. So someone else was writing the main story and I was writing a secondary story. And I went up to a couple of Met players. I'm not going to mention their names because it's not really fair, but one of them had a really good game. He had 3 hits. And the 2 players were talking. Now, first of all, I should have let them finish their conversation, but I was naive. I was still learning. It was a day game. I wasn't necessarily on some urgent deadline, but I kind of interrupted. So that was probably strike 1. And then I said, can I ask you a question? And the guy who had the 3 hits said, sure. And I said, did it feel great to get 3 hits? Terrible. That's an awful question. So the second guy jumped in and said, no, let me answer that. No, it felt awful. I wish I was 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts. And then they both started laughing. And I'm very happy they did that, because if my toughness level at that point in that clubhouse was a 2, it went to a 10 and beyond. I said, okay, this is a job. Not everybody's going to like you. Make sure your questions are better than that. That was a dumb question. You need to learn from that. And I've but from that day forward, I've become fanatical about the questions that I ask, especially in the clubhouse, especially when cameras are rolling. I think about my questions. I have follow-ups ready in my head. If they pivot this way, I'm going to pivot that way. If they give me a 1-word answer, I'm going to go back and give you an answer in the other direction. I take a lot of pride in asking questions that are well thought out, and more than anything, show that I watched the game. I feel like too often people walk into the clubhouse and I want to say, did you just watch what happened out there? He lost his slider in the 3rd inning. He was a 1-pitch pitcher for the next 3 innings. That's why they hit him in the 4th inning. That's why he had problems. He couldn't go to a breaking pitch. So anyway, I thank those 2 Mets who did that to me. I drove home that day feeling like a total failure, but I learned from that moment.
So what is your approach when a player is really struggling or something like that, when you need to interview him, you need to talk to him about what's going on? How do you, the failures are when it's the hardest to talk to people, obviously. How do you approach that?
It's a great question, Vinnie. I think when you're a beat writer, now I went from a beat writer at the Times to a national reporter, where you're still around the team a lot, but you're not there every day. And now in my role at Yes, I'm in the studio probably 80 to 90% of the time. You want to do your best to develop relationships with these guys so that when Aaron Judge is 0 for 18, this isn't the first time you've spoken to him in a week.
Mm-hmm.
You talked to him 2 days ago about his foundation. 4 days ago, you saw that he had an Instagram post about a Pepsi shoot that he's doing, or an Adidas commercial. So I tried to keep the dialogue going with the players so that every time, I keep looking for props. Every time that you walked up to them, it wasn't like this. Hey, you're 0 for your last 18. Sometimes you walk up to them and the notebook's in your pocket. Let's just have a conversation. Well, let's just talk. And I think what I've always tried to do, and it's sort of interesting that we're having this discussion, because I had this chat with my wife last night, who loves baseball and is such a great sounding board sometimes. We were talking almost about this very thing. And the idea of how do you ask a player a tough question when he's struggling? And my thing is always showing the ultimate respect for what players do. When I'm in the studio and a guy makes an error or a guy goes 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts, I've never played the game. I don't know what it's like to try and hit a 94-mile-per-hour cutter that is suddenly in on my hands. I've talked to players about that, but I don't know what that feeling is. So I always try and make sure that you remind people you can be angry if your team loses and you can be passionate as a fan, but just remember, I mean, if the rosters are, well, let's say they're 25-man rosters, they're the 750 best in the world at what they do. Don't ever forget that. So I think it's building those relationships and having players understand that you know how hard it is what they do. Now, you're going to have guys who still don't want to talk about having a bad day, and you're going to have some conflict. I could tell you a couple stories about players that I had good relationships with, and we butted heads. Really guys that I like, guys that I'm friendly with to this day, Jim Abbott or Tino Martinez, where there was some conflict to book with. Sometimes the questions aren't going to be questions that they want to hear, but we're doing a job too. And that's the other thing I always try to impress upon people. You have a manager and a coach. Well, we have an editor or a producer. And if we don't ask the question, we're not doing our job.
I love that. I completely agree. Quick follow up to that. Do you think it is easier for you now? So Vinnie grew up a Yankee fan. Now Vinnie knows you from watching the Yes Network. Do you find yourself now, after being with the network since 2010, as players are starting to play with the Yankees that grew up a Yankee fan or just a baseball fan and know you, is it easier to form better relationships with the players since they grew up watching you?
Vinnie, you have inspired this young man because his questions are all A+ questions. Yeah, Alex, I'll tell you a quick anecdote. So the second spring training that I was at Yes, I say hello to anybody I walk past in the clubhouse. I don't know like the Yankees invite 65 or 70 players. It's always at least a nod, even if I don't happen to know that young man who maybe is a catcher at single A, but obviously they need a lot of catchers in spring training. So to your point, one day I was walking toward the field and you have to go down a couple flights of stairs to get, is it a couple? Well, that's irrelevant. You have to go downstairs to get to the field. And a kid walking up who I didn't really know who he was said, "Hey, Mr. Curry, how are you doing?" And it just sort of jolted me. I didn't know who this player was, but it took me about 20 seconds to realize what you just said. He's in the Yankee system. He probably watches the Yes Network. I cover 130 games, so I'm on the pre and the post game a lot. I know they have Yes, where the minor league affiliates are. I know that they watch Yes. So that opens doors. There's no doubt that opens doors. If I go up to talk to Clark Schmidt last spring training, I'd never met him before, but without speaking for him, I almost feel like there was a realization, oh yeah, I know who this guy is. So it definitely helps you. And I always thought it was weird that people elevate you. I'm still the same reporter. I'm still doing the same thing. But as opposed to maybe reading one of your articles online, or if anybody still buys a newspaper and reads it in a newspaper, they've seen you on TV. And we've sort of been conditioned to believe, wow, somebody's on TV. That must make them really important. And so, yeah, it definitely it assists in some relationships. There's no doubt about that.
So Alex and I have been working on this for a few weeks now, and we finally have a name for our final segment we give to every one of our guests. It's officially called 3 Up, 3 Down. Thank you to Cameron Kohler and Anthony Dianatale for that name. But we're going to ask 3 questions each to you in alternating order. So Alex is going to go first. I'm going to go next. It's not really rapid fire. Take as much time as you need, deliberate, come up with your answers, whatever you need to do. So Alex, without further ado, please start us off with question number 1.
All right. So this is where I find myself getting in trouble with these questions that Vinnie says are terrible questions, to quote. So first one for you. I don't think you've ever hosted that many podcasts, right? I don't think. Do you host a podcast right now?
When my book came out with Cone, Yes had us do a 5-part series about the book called Full Count, the podcast, which was very generous of them because it gave us a lot of publicity toward the book. So I did host a podcast with David for that. Other than that, I've hosted a couple of shows at Yes. And I did a web show called JCTV, which was kind of an interview show. It wasn't a podcast, but I mean, you're asking people questions, but a podcast, not necessarily, just that one instance with Coney.
Yeah. So Alex, in your quest to become the next Jack Curry, you have one on him. So congratulations to you, Alex.
He's hosted about 100.
Yeah. What do you prefer drinking out of, plastic or glass?
Glass. It just feels more, it feels sturdier. I mean, my wife's got a bunch of styrofoam and plastic cups around the house, but yeah, I'll probably go glass. Right now, I don't know, this mug is probably ceramic or something like that. I looked for my Yogi Berra mug and it must be in the dishwasher because I wanted to have a baseball theme. Instead, I got a flower.
Second one, who would be a current player on the Yankees roster right now that if you had the choice to hire them to become a Yes Network broadcaster, who would you choose?
Wow. Now you're really putting me on the spot. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a little end around here so I don't offend anybody who's on the current roster. I'm going to tell you that when he was on the Yankees, I had multiple conversations with Austin Romine in which I told him, you will be a great announcer when your baseball career is done, if you want to do it. Because as someone who, as I mentioned earlier, is in the studio often, I would go to Austin Romine. Now I'm giving up one of my secrets here. I would try to go to the ballpark at least once a homestand because it just made me better at my pregame and postgame job. I would go to Austin Romine and I would just go down the list of pitchers. What's Tanaka doing well right now? How come Chad Green's fastball seems a little short? What have you seen out of Chapman right now? I think he's using his slider more. And in 5 minutes, Romine had covered me for the week because then when Tanaka throws his splitter and I'm on the post game talking about it, I say before the game or 2 days ago, Austin Romine told me that Masahiro Tanaka's split finger fastball belongs in a video game. That's how much it moves. So I would say that Austin Romine could have a future doing this. Not every player wants to do it. Not every player wants to share. You don't have to be critical, I think, to become an announcer. I think that's where there's a little bit of a misnomer, but you have to be honest. That's the thing. And if honesty ever bleeds into where a player thinks it's criticism, some players don't want to do that. Coney gave me a great answer one time about becoming an announcer. And when he first did it, he was so worried about being critical. But then he realized, I have to be honest. I can't sit up here and watch a pitcher throw back-to-back sliders, one cement mixer after the other, and then say, yeah, that was good pitching. No, that wasn't. You just had one tumble out of your hand that you got lucky that you fouled it back. Why are you throwing that pitch again? So I kind of veered off into a rambling answer there, but that's my answer.
So you've been around a lot of people in your life. Your job has surrounded you with just a great number of people. Who is the greatest leader, manager, player, whatever? Who's the greatest leader that you've ever seen?
Based on the amount of time where I covered the Yankees and when I walked into this man's life and saw him operate the way that he did, it would be Joe Torre. He gets the Yankees in 1996 with a losing record as a manager, having been fired from 3 previous places, but he was the right manager at the right time. He had a soothing way about him, but his players respected him so greatly that I feel as if that combination just worked. Now, I love Buck Showalter, who had preceded Joe, and I think Buck Showalter is a terrific X's and O's manager and is as smart as any baseball person I've ever seen. But you asked in terms of leader and being a leader, I think it was Joe Torre, and I think the results speak for themselves for those 4 World Series in 5 years. Those Yankee players respected him. They played for him. And Joe managed from the gut, and he had Don Zimmer next to him kind of pushing him a little bit to gamble a little more than maybe Joe always did. So he would be the one that would come to mind.
Number 3, and the last one for me for this new segment. You've done a lot of interviews on different radio stations, TV shows, podcasts. What is one question you've never been asked before that you've always wanted to have been asked?
Ooh. I don't know how anyone would know this, so I can't fault anyone for never asking this. My mom was incredibly influential in my life. Unfortunately, she passed away in 1994. If there was any way anyone would have ever asked me a question about my mother and her influence on me, that would have made me feel great. That would have allowed me to talk about her, which anytime I get the opportunity to do that brightens my day. So I'm not faulting any interviewer for having never asked that. How would they know? And other people, sometimes when someone has lost a loved one, they don't like going down that road. It's difficult for them to. But for me, it's enjoyable because I want people to know the influence my mother had in my life. I want to know that I've adopted her work ethic. I've treated people the way I saw her treat people. And that would be something that would have always been interesting for me to be able to talk about. So thank you, Alex. I took the opportunity to do it anyway.
Alex, I just want to let you know that the next time we bring Jack on, I have dibs on asking that question.
Yes, please do, Vinnie. Please do. And by the way, well, I'll let you ask you a question, and then I want to ask you a question.
Okay. What is the most important position in baseball?
Oh, it's the pitcher. Of course it's the pitcher. And if you have anybody on your show who says anything differently, that they're not baseball fans. And I understand the catcher, John Flaherty, who I work with on the pre and post, is the catcher puts the fingers down and he helps to guide the pitcher. But I mean, the pitcher has the baseball. Nothing starts until the pitcher decides to throw and decides what he's going to throw. What do you think, Vin?
So wrong answer. Not only do we have somebody on the show that doesn't think that, he's on it every day, and it's me. So that's tough.
What do you think?
First base, every day of the week. Best position, the coolest position, the most important. It's not even really a question to me. I just know the answer. My goal really of this podcast is just to build the first base brand. That's all I'm really.
I appreciate that. I respect your. I respect how passionate you are about an argument that's going to be proven false. But I respect you for that. So I need to ask you a question as an Old Dominion guy. In your Old Dominion baseball history, do you know the name Kevin Bierce?
I know the name, yes.
I haven't checked recently. I think he holds the all-time school record for strikeouts. I don't think Verlander surpassed him. I played Little League, Babe Ruth, and high school baseball against this guy. Could not get a hit off him if they had given me 2 bats. So I obviously followed his career very closely. He had a cup of coffee with the Cleveland Indians. Uh-huh. But when Alex told me about you and I looked up your career and saw ODU, I thought of Kevin because he was such a great guy. And I'm glad he got a chance to make it to the majors. I wish he had stuck longer. But he was one of those guys who even when you were 12 or 13 years old, you said, man, how does anybody ever hit this guy? We couldn't touch him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, at least he struck you out. So that's.
Yes. I remember they brought him into a Little League game once. I guess in Little League, I forget now, they have these innings limits. I was up in the last inning with 2 outs and a runner on base. And the other kid pitching, I thought, I got a chance to do some damage here. They brought Kevin in for 1 out, struck me out on 3 pitches. So there you go. That's why I became a journalist.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, Jack, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us.
This was a lot of fun, guys, and I appreciate you having such an interest in talking to me, and best of luck with the podcast. I like the combination. I like what you guys are doing here. You have both sides of the spectrum covered. And Vinnie, best of luck. Continue with your career. I hope you're on the field a lot in 2021 because of what happened to all the players in 2020. And Alex, I know I'll be talking to you. So best of luck with your 24/7 journalism pursuit that you have.
Jack, thanks so much. Appreciate you coming on today.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You just got done listening to that interview with Jack Curry. Now you're back to Alex and myself. How'd you like it? Let us know. We want you to let us know on our social medias how you like our interviews, or if you hate them. We want to know that too, because at least me, I'm trying to get better at this job. And I know that I haven't been great so far. So I want to get better. That's my goal, is to every episode, I just want to, keep climbing that ladder of asking better and better questions. I just broke the chair that I am standing on or leaning on. So that was awesome. That's what happens when you only film one take, ladies and gentlemen. And I will not go back and film a second one. But we hope you enjoyed listening to the episode. I've got a big night ahead of me because I have a Super Bowl in Madden, Jets versus the Packers in 2026, I believe the year is. So I'm very excited for that. It's going to be a big night. We'll let everybody know tomorrow if I win or not. But Alex, you haven't spoken at all during this outro. What you got for the people?
Well, I just have to say, I think I lost count of just how many times Jack Curry said I had a good question. So again, maybe the people out there that listen and have kept better track than me can let us notice how many great questions I had and how many awful questions Vinnie had. And I would agree that you are trying to improve every single episode, and you have improved. I think you've gone from beginner to somewhat okay. So that's a step in the right direction, right, Vinnie?
Hey, it's all about improvement. It's all about improvement. I'll say this till the day I die. Rome was not built in a day, and I'll keep saying it, and you'll keep hearing me say it. Even when I'm not saying it, Alex, you'll hear that in your head, and that's what I'm all about, is just getting better and better every single day. So we'll see what happens as we continue this. I'm just excited to be here. That's it. I'm just happy to be here.
Well, you shouldn't just be happy to be here. You should want to be here. So I think eventually you'll get to that point. So we'll get there. We'll get there, folks. But again, we want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day, out of your hour, out of your week to listen to this podcast.
We want to thank you, yes, for listening, but we also want to let you know who we've got tomorrow, which I believe is Anderson Miller, Kansas City Royals prospect. And we've got some ads for Anderson Miller that we're going to be posting tomorrow that we're going to support. We're going to support him and what's happening in Louisville with the Players Alliance. We're going to make sure we shout out the Players Alliance and get their links out there for everybody to see. We're really excited for that. That's something you and I are both passionate about. It's something that Anderson's passionate about. So we're going to let everybody know what it is. So we're really excited to, 5 episodes in a week is a lot, but we're really excited to get that content out there for everybody. So, people can see what's going on.
It's 5 episodes, but I might be biased, and I know you're biased here, but they're 5 great episodes. We would not be putting out 5 average episodes. These are 5 you can't miss interviews and conversations with people. Some you might not have heard of, but some you might have heard of a little bit, and then some, of course, the names of. And they're all 5 conversations that you have to hear. And I can't wait for tomorrow for everyone to hear the conversation that Anderson, you and I had all tomorrow. It's a great interview, a great insight, and of course, supporting a great cause with what the Player Alliance are doing. And you can find out all the information about what the Player Alliance is about and what they're doing in communities around the country and how you can support them. So again, we'll get into all that information tomorrow. If you are interested in learning about it right now, just look up the Players Alliance and find all the information on their website for how you can go out and support them right now. But again, Vinnie, a great time as always catching up with you, and appreciate all of the listeners tuning in to a whole new ballgame.
Bye.